I love it.
Wow.
I wasn't sure when it was going to end. Welcome to Connect This, the 101st episode or so. We're just gonna keep the or so. But today we are celebrating our anniversary, our birthday. Thank you, Gigi, the happy birthday hat. We want to honor the celebration that we had from Kim previously. I think we have something queued up from that from a few weeks ago.
Thanks.
We have that image. It looks like we might be pulling that up in a second. But this is we're calling this the 100th show, the 100-ish show. And it's nearly 4 years. Well, it's 4 years since we launched. The first show was on October 30th, 2020. And it was a little bit of an experiment. I want to thank Rye and Henry Holgertz for getting us this far. The idea was that Travis, I thought, was so brilliant in different meals that we had together and things like that, where he bought me wings, and I wanted to expose him to the world. And then we had Doug and Kim join us, and other guests have come along the way, as we'll review a little bit. But we'll start with a brief reminiscence. Do we have the image, Rye? There we go. That was Kim a few short weeks ago celebrating when we told her to, but then we canceled at the last second without warning her.
I had all the balloons and everything. Thanks for reminding me of that special moment, Chris.
It was perfect. You still have the Reuben mug, though, so that's great.
I do. It's in the dishwasher. I just used it last night.
So Kim McKinley, welcome. Kim, who are you with?
I am with Utopia Fiber. But I will say this today, on Monday, I did put my resignation in for Utopia Fiber. So I will be here for another month. I have not announced where I'm going, so stay tuned. But I've been here for 14 years. So it's a little bit of the end of the era that's happening. And I can't wait to watch Utopia just crush it as they continue to expand into other states and throughout Utah.
Yes, and when you said here, you meant Utopia Fiber for another month. You're going to be with us until the end of time, which it already feels like you're stuck in.
Don't you worry about that. Doug and I already have a contract, remember?
Yes.
Speaking of Doug Dawson coming to us from Asheville, apparently in higher definition than previously. Welcome.
Yeah, I am in higher definition. I have to say that I have to re-examine my participation in this if you're going to start with professional opening. Jeez, we have to step our game up.
You know,
that was very good.
It was great. I wasn't sure if Rye was going to have the sign just fall off on the ground, which would have been also somewhat appropriate.
Yeah.
Our final guest, Gigi Sohn, needs no introduction, has been here before with American Association for Public Broadband. Welcome.
It's great to be here. And again, happy birthday. I love this hat. This is a great hat. Great hat.
Yeah, I would be wearing that. I would try to go to extra birthday parties if I had that hat. I'll tell you that right now. We also have Blair Levin. Bring him in a minute. I'll just give him a break before he's on camera because we have a couple of bullet points and we have a short video that Rye has compiled with some highlights. So our first show was 4 years ago. Doug came on. His first episode was episode 7, which was right after Kim's first episode. But we didn't have them on together, creating the modern magic of Connect This until episode 9. And then I think that at that point, our thought was we would do sort of like educational episodes on alternate shows. So like Travis and I would have on people talking about like LTE and how it worked or this or that. And then we'd come back to kind of like a news show with Doug and Kim. And then we realized that all the good ones had Doug and Kim. So we would just do those from then on, especially once we realized you'd keep coming back.
That's the bigger shocker, is that we just kept coming back. It wasn't that we were funny or fun. Yeah, we get it.
Just keep the checks flowing, Chris. Just keep
right. So
the residuals keep coming in.
I didn't know Travis isn't here today. He just got pulled away by real work, unfortunately, running that ISP. I will say that yesterday I had conduit installed in my yard to my garage from my house so I can set some things up that I want to do. He sent a crew out that often works for him, and they were singing him praises. So Travis is a special guy. I love how much time of his that we get for this show. But every time I run into people that work for him, they just start talking about how wonderful it is to work for him, how many small businesses that he's helped to create through his contracting and things like that. And it's a reminder for me how locally owned businesses are really important, the multiplier effect.
Yep.
Okay. So the first live show, we did 3 live shows at this point. I think Kim was at all of them. October 7th, 2021 was our first live show with me and Travis in the office. Hilarious start. Our audio is out of sync, and so it was a really hard show. We have had 69 unique panelists, and Rye went through every show to figure that out. We've done the 3 live shows, and that's the number of times I've accidentally turned off my computer in the middle of a show. So if you remember all those times too. As best we can tell, because it's difficult for how long each of the transcripts are, and we have more than 100 of them, we talked about chicken wings more than 120 times. So that's a fair amount. The famous chicken wing bet that kicked it all off was March 4th, 2021. Brian Worthen was on, and we were talking about it. I said that by March 2022, we'd have 50-10 as the standard for what broadband was. It took until earlier this year, I think, we got to 120. But guests on that show, including Kim, were making a hard case for 100 megabit symmetrical as the definition for broadband. And now, as far as we can tell, Travis has asked 20 times if BEAD has connected anyone yet, but there are still 0 BEAD connections as of this show. Those are some of the key stats. And I think now we're going to roll into the quick highlight video before we jump into the real show. It says it's preparing to live stream the meeting. When I told my team that I wanted to do this, they were looking at me like, well, what kind of preparation have you done? And I was like, welcome to another episode of a tiny little show that we're calling Connect This. Right. Welcome to Connect This. 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 Hello. So, Travis, is this from India? Were you over on the subcontinent?
I don't even remember our date. Come on. When you ask somebody out, they want to feel special at the end.
Just a PR tactic so they don't have to talk about the murder trial that's happening.
Global warming, and we're all going to die.
Yeah.
The local communities see this and it pisses them off.
Hexagons seem to be the it girl right now. Hexagons are so hexy.
I never believe the spec sheets that hardware vendors put out.
It's not designed only for the big companies and they're like massive.
February 23rd, we
They're
have
from the future. Yeah.
Some of us live in the future, buddy.
These community networks, and more of these municipal networks that there are, the harder it becomes for the incumbents to knock us down.
If you are going to be coming up here and subjecting yourself to the pain of hearing us talk about things,
Don't need it. I agree. But
wrong.
And it will be out sometime in the future.
Okay. I'm glad it will be in the future because if it was a different time, that would be puzzling.
Right.
Wow.
Wow.
Kim had the best reaction. I could see everyone's cameras as we were behind the scenes.
Like I talked about a murder trial at some point. After this.
I like the fact that one never knows what I'm gonna look like. Hair, beard.
You looked.
I would say that of Kim. I mean, she had brown hair, she had glasses, she had hats. I mean, my word, you are like a chameleon, girl.
Well, I would say that his beard was very dark in episode 1. I
Yes.
did notice that.
Yeah, pandemic beard. I brought Michelle in to take a look at the pictures, and she said, "Nope, we're not going back." Apparently, that's her. We're not going back. Well, thank you, Rye, for compiling that. That was a lot of fun. We are going to welcome Blair Levin on. Welcome, Blair. I think you're wearing your hat as a securities and analyst.
Yes. It's not nearly as nice as the hat that Gigi had, but
right.
That's the one I'm doing. Yeah.
And our first story is one that we probably won't harp on too much, but we do have an image for it when you get a chance to throw that up, Rye. The one U.S. News and World Report has done a study, and if you have a public email, you might have received multiple emails promoting it. I know that I have 3 or 4 now from them saying this is really important. They studied 5 of the more populated states, and the one that I thought was the most interesting was the one about the average costs. Who pays the most for internet access? Doug has been saying for years we're approaching $100 internet. They've hit it in Pennsylvania. They're right on the cusp in New York, and we're going to hit it soon elsewhere too. So this is based on surveys and self-reported data, I believe, in this case for these numbers. So I was curious if anyone else had any major reactions to this study.
I do. So look at that. Look to the far right, or at least my right. 76% of residents from the most populous states want the U.S. government to cap what ISPs can charge. Inside the Beltway, that's called state regulation. And it like drives everybody up a wall. But I mean, I think this is the reality. The other number you don't have up here, although I will say a lot of my data analytics friends are questioning it. According to this survey, 87% of the people surveyed said they want the Affordable Connectivity Program to be reinstated. That sounded high to some people I really respect, like Catherine DeWitt and John Horrigan. But still, even if it was, 75% or 70%, that's a lot. So, I mean, affordability is real, and affordability is an issue. And people could just have to keep fighting for some policy that's going to help low income and, frankly, middle class families get online.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that when we talk about election prospects and the ACP. But Kim, you had another thing you wanted to say, I think, quick.
Well, yeah, I was just wondering because I did skim the article, but when they're talking about these price points, they also mentioned that most of these people didn't even understand the speed they were getting.
Yes.
So I was like, that's where a little bit of a disconnection comes from this survey, because you can talk about your price point, but if you're not talking about the lowest cost product, then I think that there is a disconnect of what this really represents too.
Yes, regarding rate regulation, this is something I really want to cover in depth. And I would like to I might be bugging some of the folks like Blair that were around for it. Names like Andy Schwartzman, Gene Kimmelman, Gigi, you were probably there too, but I don't want to insult anyone for the 80s and 90s discussions over the cable wars. So we want to cover that more in the future, some of the history of efforts over price regulation. It gives me heartburn. Doug and then Blair.
Yeah, my reaction is, first of all, these numbers ring true to me. So I do, our firm does surveys. These look real. I just want to highlight this because US Telecom put out a nice report every year. They said in the last year that broadband prices have dropped 18.5%. So that kind of is a different story than this one. So the big guys do not want to own these numbers because these are being driven by cable companies. And we all know that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Blair, how'd you react to this study?
You're on mute.
You're muted.
Thank you very much. I haven't really studied the numbers. I'll make a couple of comments. First of all, I'm a little concerned about self-reported data in the sense that a lot of what people are buying are bundles. And I don't know whether they're looking at a price that includes the price of Netflix or multi-channel video, or when in case of cable, could be wireless as well. Maybe it doesn't. But I think self-reported numbers have certain problems. Secondly, there's always an issue between industry and certain consumer groups about the extent to which you're measuring things on a per megabit or megabit basis. In other words, if you look at this, the speeds are constantly going up, and the prices are also going up on a per megabit basis, not so much. So, but I'll just, wearing my analyst hat, the question is, what are the odds that the government steps in some way to price regulate? And I think the odds are very low, whatever the result of the election. The last time we did this, and this is what I think you were referring to, Chris, was the 1992 Cable Act. And I was chief of staff at the FCC during the second effort. The first effort, which was before Chairman Hunt and I got there, led to prices going up. On Reid's first day in office, he got a letter from 34 senators and I believe 128 members of the House saying, please redo it, prices were supposed to go down. That's a lot of members to write a letter to a chair. We did it, prices went down, but here's the problem. It is very difficult to price regulate a multifaceted product. In other words, you say, okay, here's the price for, let's call it 50 down, 20 up.
Right.
Okay, well then they offer that, but there's no spam protection. There's different latency. There's different this. There's different, the charges.
Yeah, I don't want to. I mean,
it's just.
I don't want to spend too much time on that.
Both factors.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point, and this is where I want to spend an entire show of perhaps of the community broadband bits talking about it, because the thing that I think scares me the most is anyone who thinks it would be easy to do that. So I want to try and help a little bit with education of the people who have been there before. On this, I thought it was stuff that I more or less expected. I don't know. I want to move on to the next topic, but did anyone have any surprises from that? Kim?
I was more surprised, like what Gigi said about like the ACP, because I was like, do that many people even know what ACP is? That's where I was a little, I thought that number was high as well, but that's about it.
They had the surveyors had to explain to people what that was to get any reaction at all. Yeah. So
I just want to point out one more number that really struck me. 53% said that the cost of household goods and groceries make it tougher to pay for a broadband connection. So that's a high number. Number.
Obviously telecommunications has increased significantly in our lives over the past 40 years. But I was born in 78, a time when I think, a telephone cost $4 or $5 a month. It was negligible in the household budget. Telecommunications bills now are rivaling mortgages in some families, I guess the fortunate ones, but it's often the second or third highest bills in that a household faces.
But Chris, can I just point out, and I don't mean to defend industry now, but what we are now doing is free, right? You're not paying any incremental cost for this Zoom. I actually went to the World's Fair in 1964 when I was 10 years old, meaning I'm the oldest person here, but also recall the magic of kind of a one-to-one video communication that costs $5 a minute or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm just saying what we're getting out of communications is vastly different than what we were getting when the 96 Act was passed.
Yes, the value has definitely gone up significantly. And also note, we've gone from paying for phone, paying for texts. There's all kinds of things we used to pay for that we get for free. And we'll talk more throughout this. I think this leads right into the hurricane and disaster communications, which Doug had a front row seat for Helene coming through. Doug, you had a blog post about it that I thought it really resonated with some of the other themes we're hitting on. But do you just want to take a minute to share what you went through?
Yeah, and I'll just talk about the communications experience. You can go to my blog if you want to hear the rest of my sad story. But We had no communications at all for 3 days. Cell phones dead, power out, internet dead, nothing. Then the cell phones came back and SOS only, meaning all you could do was call 911. And people were starting to get pretty frantic at this point because they want to let their loved ones know that they were still alive. But I mean, this was a really bad disaster. The first thing then that came back on about the 6th or 7th day, the AT&T came out with 1 bar. And the other cell companies did not. So I happen to have an AT&T phone. So I'm, at this point, we're a communal place. Everyone is sharing everything. So I'm handing my phone out all day to everyone so they can, try to get calls through. But even then, maybe 1 out of 3 texts made it out. Nobody could call us. We could not receive calls. So, but every day it got a little better. Finally, about 10 or 12 days in, we got the 2 bars and you could actually make a phone call 90% of the time. It took me 18 days for Charter to come back. And I understand that completely, because if you were here, the 2 streets over from me, every single pole was laying on the ground. I mean, there was some big, terrible messes here. That's actually impressive to get it back that fast. But they had no communications with the public. And that's what we did not like at all, because the electric company, from the second we got texting back, they told us everything. Not only generic things about the city, but they told us about our neighborhood. And Charter didn't do anything until the day before I got my broadband back. They simply didn't communicate. So, comparing electric and Charter is just night and day. So the other cell phone companies did a very poor job too. I mean, nobody heard from Verizon, nobody heard from T-Mobile, because these are not their prime markets. And so this is a very heavy AT&T market. So AT&T did a good job here, cellular wise. So it was very interesting to watch the differences, but really it made the point of how important communications is. People were worried about that way more than they were worried about food. They're like, I got to communicate. I mean, there were rumors that somebody had a hotspot downtown and 500 people would walk down there to see if it was true. And of course it wasn't. I mean, people were frantic to communicate. So.
Thanks, Doug. We did a segment with Jess Auer, who's part of our community broadband networks team, who's also in Asheville, not far from you, usually.
Yes.
And
she was like 4 blocks away. Yeah.
And there were times when she was looking on the website and it looked like Charter had said that they were back up, and they weren't. And it was a mess. And it reminds me of a story I've told before of a neighbor, a friend who lives a mile away from me, when his neighbor's tree got blown down across the back of his yard, and it ripped the power line and the communications line off of his house. And he had a long comical experience trying to get Comcast on the phone to repair it, because they wanted him to power cycle his modem before they did anything. And whereas the power company was there in 6 hours to have it reattached and fixed it all up. And I remember going to an event where an industry lobbyist said, well, do you really want this utility? Do you want telecommunications to be regulated like a utility? To which I was like, yes. I mean, not entirely. Admittedly, it is not the same as electricity. We don't have the same market structure, but we're gonna see these polls continue to rise, and we need to figure out some way of dealing with it. So we're gonna come back and talk more about that. But on disasters and communications, anyone else want to share anything about that?
Well, isn't this is time, like what Doug is going through, that states really see why this is infrastructure? Because this is what happened in California with the wildfires. It wasn't as big on the radar until they had those islands that were stuck without communications with the wildfires happening. I think although these natural disasters are catastrophic and terrible, they do put a lesson and kick some people in the butt about how important this really is to people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we realize our entire part of the state doesn't have any redundancy. I mean, there was no backup. There's not fiber coming from 3 different directions to here. So,
yeah, the Asheville airport had no access. It was pretty remarkable, and it was deep damage. So, Gigi?
Yeah, I think where this is really going to hit hard is there's a number of companies, AT&T, Brightspeed being 2 of them, that want to get rid of their copper plant. And, unless they can show, so I understand that both have a technology that essentially, replicates what copper does. I'd like to see it. But until that happens, I think the copper plant's not going anywhere. The California Public Utilities Commission rejected a bunch of AT&T applications, a lot of AT&T applications to discontinue copper, and it's because it's more resilient. So, I mean, look, I actually went to go see a central office down in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, Brightspeeds, and it's so funny because fiber is just like plug and play and it's easy, and then copper is like all these wires, like some wild-haired beast. So I understand why they want to move away from it, but as we continue to have these natural disasters and resiliency is a problem, I think unless they can show that they can migrate off of copper with the same functionality as copper, I think it's going to be very, very tough for them to do it.
I think with that, I want to, just because we have fertile ground in other topics more. One is that we want to make sure people were aware the rescue plan dollars are coming to a close, where they will go back to the Treasury or they will remain in the Treasury if they are not taken advantage of. Counties, cities that have access to these dollars who have not developed a plan yet for them will soon lose them. So, Doug, when we talked about this before, you felt like a lot of places were aware of it, and yet it seems like there's still money sitting out there that doesn't have a plan.
I'm still aware of a number of counties who have not made their allocations, and they have till December 31st, but they really have till December 1st because they have to go through the formal. There's a ton of paperwork for them to prove that they allocated it. So it's getting pretty close. Yeah. So
okay.
Why
Gigi
haven't
wanted
they
to make
have-
sure.
Why haven't they used them though? Like that's just my biggest reason.
local politics. They're still arguing new fire truck or give them ISP money, or they're still fighting over where it goes. So.
Okay.
Random question from the audience. Why not have a 50-year plan to underground fiber? From a loyal listener viewer. I would say 100-year plan or 120-year plan, 50-year plan that will convert to 100-year plan. Fully agree. The cities that have gone through this, and it often takes them on the order of 100 years, well worth it. Smart planning.
Can I raise a crazy idea?
Yeah.
I just had a conversation 2 weeks ago with the woman who's the founder of a company called Aqualink. And they're not in the U.S., except in Anacortes, Washington. And they put fiber lines in water lines, right? In a place, I don't know if you know what Anacortes is, but it's all bay, right? It's like, it's like all these like little fingers of land. And I just thought that was so fascinating. It was founded in Israel. They have plant in the UK. But they're they want to get it here. It's a little kind of late for BEAD funding, but I just thought that was a fascinating possibility.
Yeah, it's come up. There's a company called i3 that used to do it back in the days, I think. It's a European thing, a Japanese thing. But I think one of the issues is it's kind of like with conduit also. If you bury something underneath something else, like if you have a water line, you're like, let's put fiber conduit underneath it. Well, then you have to go through the water line to get to the fiber if you need access to it. I think it's a similar thing with water pipes, in that if Travis was here, he would just have a headache to think about how hard it already is to access fiber and then to have it encapsulated in something else. But I think that there's use cases where it makes sense.
I think they've talked about that and sewer pipes too. I think I've heard with sewer pipes.
Yeah, deployed by robots. Go ahead, Gigi.
So somebody asked how to spell it, and I can't get in the chat. So it's AQUALINQ, but you won't find a website for it.
All right, I bet Ryan will figure it out. Yep, there you go.
But I mean, I've looked into the U.S. versions. There's a lot of technical issues. It's probably best for small towns. When you get to cities, it's just too complicated. But there are places where that would make a lot of sense. So,
all right, we've talked about this before, perhaps overwhelmingly with me making snide comments, but Republicans are critical of BEAD. And Gigi, you wanted to make sure we touched on this. You had a few comments about it. We were together at National Harbor recently, and I thought you made some good points. So you wanna remind us what's going on there?
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with Assistant Secretary Davidson that this is all political, right? I mean, it's all an opportunity to blame Kamala Harris for being the broadband czar, and not a BEAD cent has been spent yet. But I urge people, read the law. Okay, the reason that there's a 5-year plan, an initial proposal, a final proposal, That's not something NTIA made up. Okay. That is in the law. You know, has NTIA always moved with the greatest alacrity? No. But the fact that, the fact that we are where we are for the most part is because Congress put in all these requirements. The other thing that I find really unbelievable and laughable is the fact that, and Blair did this brilliantly in a hearing a couple of weeks ago about the BEAD programming, is that the people who are criticizing, the biggest critics of the speed with which NTIA is moving, are the people that supported the Rural Digital Opportunities Fund, the RDOF, or as I call it, the CARDOF. And if you don't know the reference, I'm referring to my friend, Commissioner Brendan Carr, who voted and was a big proponent of pushing out money before the 2020 election for rural broadband. And that program, for the most part, has been abject failure. And I just read about 2 more defaults today, Mercury, who I never heard of, and Cable One. So the defaults of the RDOF, because folks either don't want to build the networks, or they're sitting on interest, or they want more money from the federal government to build, are just myriad. So, NTIA and the Commerce Department and the Biden administration do not want another CARDOF. They want to make sure that the money is spent wisely, that the entities that get the money can actually build the networks, and hopefully they will oversee the building of those networks, make sure that the promises made are promises kept.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, the smartest thing that we've done for broadband infrastructure is the rescue plan. Now, I have a certain view because I prefer maximum flexibility for local governments. Some will have made bad choices, and we'll see stories about those coming out, I'm sure, where the money was not spent wisely. But hundreds of communities have rapidly made smart investments with the money that came out so quickly through the rescue plan. If Congress wants to move in that direction in the future, I strongly encourage them to. Fewer restrictions, more flexibility, and a recognition that some of the money will be spent unwisely, and that is the price of moving more rapidly and giving more flexibility, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll be the first to admit, I've been critical of NTIA. I was critical of the letter of credit requirement. I don't like the fact that they didn't grant the waivers to Florida and Alabama. They had asked for the ability to spend BEAD money in the RDOF areas where the networks weren't being built. There has been this lack of flexibility on occasion. I don't think they've been giving the states enough authority. But I don't think that's the main reason where BEAD money hasn't been spent yet. I think the majority of the reason is because Congress set it up that way. And yes, Treasury's been able to push out that money, not the same restrictions, much more flexibility. I'd love to see more of those in the future, without a doubt.
I have to assume that the number of people working in this space has tripled or quadrupled, and you just can't do that overnight. Blair, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I'm just going to make 2 points. And Gigi, thank you for your comments. Part of the reason why Congress put the requirements in that it did was because of the failure of RDOF. And yet the RDOF folks like Carr have not really owned up to it. With the requirement that took the most time was the mapping that the FCC had to do. That's taken the majority of time since the bill passed. RDOF used a map that the Republicans said was okay and turned out to be horrible, a complete disaster. But the second thing is the Capital Projects Fund, which had a lot more flexibility. It didn't require a map. It just allocated funds based on a formula that Congress set up. But secondly, like every other program, it was, here's a little bit of money, move the ball down the field. With the BEAD program, it's here's a bunch of money, finish the job. But as anybody knows, getting 95% of the job done or getting 90% of the job done takes about 50% of the time. It's the last 10% that'll take another 50% or even more of the time. So that's part of the reason why it has taken a lot longer. And the critics can certainly score political points, but the reality of actually having a program that finishes the job of getting broadband access everywhere is much more difficult. Unless you simply want to concede, and we'll talk about this in a minute, I bet. You want to just say satellite can do it all. And we're fine with that. If you do that, then the job's done.
I think Gigi just got a text that Alex Ovechkin was on her front lawn, so she was checking out that on the side.
No, I was trying to get the reflection to get out of my glasses, and I failed miserably. So that was the end of that. Anyway,
I was going to say,
Go ahead, Kim.
I was just going to say this quickly, that I get what Gigi's saying. I get that they put all these things in place because they don't want it to be the RDOF that happened. But I also think that there is a lot of regulations that are blocking people from applying for the money. I think it's a balancing act, because I do think I understand why they did it, but I also hear the criticisms on the ISP side of going, I don't want to apply because of all the regulations that they have in it. So I see both sides. I think that I do agree that the Republicans are just criticizing for the sake of criticizing in this political moment we're having, though. So
Yeah,
if it's valid criticism, I think that's a different story.
Yeah, I've found a number of Republicans to have like perfectly good policy ideas. But what drives me nuts is just that, like, they had 4 years to have infrastructure week, and finally the Democrats did it, and we're moving through it. And like, I'm tired of only hearing sniping and nothing actually productive. So with that said, I'm going to cut off our sniping and move over to us complaining about T-Mobile's users complaining about their lifetime caps changing, because this story is just wonderful. I think John Brodkin does great reporting over at Ars Technica. I think I've subscribed to them for like 15 years, right when I started here. And frankly, Ars Technica should have him write more stories. But there was a life lock, and Gigi wanted to talk about it, and I wanted to bring something in on it. Doug, we haven't heard anything from you in a second, though. In previous shows, I remember you talking about how like a lot of companies seem to go through this, and they all end up backing down.
I honestly, my reason behind the way they do this is these large bureaucracies at these companies are really incompetent. Honest to God, they don't remember that they did that 2 years ago. I'm not kidding you, because they change VPs constantly. They make decisions by portions of the country. I mean, they don't have, there's not one Comcast. There's like 11 Comcast, because there's different regions and they all go their different path. And so a lot of these mistakes are simply somebody's going to get a bonus for getting more customers and outgo the old rules. And there's no one to go, hey, you can't do that. You made promise to these folks. Believe it or not, I believe it's mostly incompetence. I don't believe it's a corporate strategy to screw their customers. And I think every time they get caught, they're highly embarrassed, and they're hoping they only have to pay 10% of them off for doing it. So,
well, Gigi is going to bring this, I think, into the modern day with discussion about how they did make this promise before they merged with Sprint, but things have gotten worse since they merged with Sprint. And I might have mangled it just a little bit for people who haven't tracked this story. T-Mobile had advertised that people would have a price for life, and then they started raising the price. And it turned out, if you read the fine print, the price for life was never a price for life. It was always a lie. So, Gigi, go ahead.
Yeah, I get no joy out of saying I told you so, but I was one of the most vehement opponents of the T-Mobile Sprint merger. I testified on the Hill. I was very public about it. And I had always been very close to T-Mobile, and I pissed them off royally. But I think this is a post-T-Mobile merger thing. And I think it really, it delves into exactly what Doug was just saying, right? You have changes in management, you have change in CEO, who else knows what changes, but T-Mobile made a lot of promises before that merger and in support of that merger, including we're not going to riff anybody. And it didn't take very long. It took maybe a year before they just riffed a whole bunch of folks that fire for those that don't know what riff means. And it was interesting in Brodkin's article, there were a lot of folks complaining, saying, that merger was really deadly to what T-Mobile was all about. T-Mobile was the uncarrier. And we argued, if you go 4-3, they're going to become just like AT&T and Verizon. And that's exactly what happened. I am a T-Mobile customer, and I've seen my bill go up and up and up. So I don't know what LifeLock I got. But prices have gone up, and they're acting exactly like the other two, which is what we warned. This is maybe for another show, but I sure hope Boost Mobile, which is owned by Dish, will become that fourth carrier that will moderate the behavior of the other three. Because right now, it ain't happening.
I have to disagree. They didn't become the same. They became worse.
Take that.
Why?
This question about the fourth carrier, I would love if I could ever get Nilay Patel to join us. He has been merciless in making fun of Dish becoming the fourth carrier in terms of the promises they've made. He takes a very different perspective than New Street Research does, Blair, on whether or not Dish has met its obligations and the FCC is letting it off too early. I don't even understand it, but I just enjoy his enthusiasm that he brings to it. This story, though, it has all these comments that people had made about T-Mobile. And what's interesting is it really reinforces what we just talked about, which is different departments, different parts of the country all have different answers for why their prices are going up and things like that. Blair, go ahead.
No, I just, it's interesting. I attended certain parts of the trial, including the testimony of the then T-Mobile executive, which the judge relied on to decide to let the deal go forward, saying that the brand of being the Un-carrier was so important that obviously they were going to stay consistent with that and they wouldn't raise prices, which was kind of contrary to what the state's economists were saying in terms of it's not really about brand, it's really about economic incentives. And that's, I think, probably what that is, appears to us what happened.
It is.
I would like to side to one more thing that Gigi said. I believe they intended to lay people off from day one. So I believe they had testified.
Well, yeah.
I think they were lying on the stand because of
no,
that.
I mean, you can't take that seriously. I mean, you don't merge a company and not
keep all the people,
their efficiencies, as they call it.
Correct.
But one of the things I thought was interesting is that we are almost 10 years now from when Longmont, Colorado, a municipal fiber network started operating. They launched with a price guarantee for life. They launched where if you took service in the first 3 months that it was available in your neighborhood, you would have $50 a month gigabit service, no additional fees, no equipment fees, and you would have that price for life for gigabit. And if you moved within city boundaries, you would take that charter membership with you. They have held good on that. They expected 30% market share. They got 60%. They're sitting at above 60% market share now. They've continued that from for everyone who is on it. People that have
Do
moved,
we know how many people were started on that? Like
90%. Yeah, like I tracked this over the years, and it was like, I mean, the vast majority. At one point, it was like 93%, and then as they gained subscribers over the years, it watered it down because they were not eligible for it anymore. But they've gone through a CEO shift. They've gone through all kinds of different marketing campaigns. They're actually about to launch their next discount for life to celebrate the 10 years, in which they are going to offer a $10 discount if you take service during this window while they're celebrating the 10 years that they've been operating. And so I just thought it was interesting in that we actually see someone upholding that marketing claim.
They will have a long-term problem. I mean, 20 years from now with inflation, they can't be profitable at that place. At some point, but how many people will still be on it by then?
No, but that's what people told me from the beginning. And yet, even after this inflation, I believe in 2026, I could be confusing my cities. I believe they pay off the rest of their debt in 2026, 2027. And they're trying to figure out what they're going to do because
that'll make a big difference. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. They have they could actually lower their prices even further if they wanted to, is my impression. Now, not everyone's going to get 60, 70% market share, right? So it could have been a much different situation if they were sitting at 40%. But they did win. So I'm not telling everyone to just go copy it, but okay.
But that's what companies with integrity do. So there you go. So
yeah. Kim?
I was just going to say that's the benefit of Muni Fiber, right? I think that's where you see the benefits of that they can't make a profit on these at the end of the day, that they have to lower prices of them what they are. We've seen it on the people who were helping in Idaho Falls. They started with their infrastructure fee at $30. They've already moved it down to $25. And I think that they will continue to do so as the network becomes more profitable and whatnot. But yeah, no, this is why Muni Fiber is such a big player as we put infrastructure in right now.
Okay. We're going to do a very quick hit on Cox on the lawsuit. Gigi, you also want to touch on this, and Blair, I was curious if we talked about this at a little bit of length previously, but the main question is Cox is suing the broadband office in the state of Rhode Island. They're pretty frustrated. But Gigi, you wanted to make sure that you reminded people of something here.
Well, I've been trying to encourage NTIA and the Commerce Department to either intervene in the case or say something publicly about it, because if there isn't significant pushback, this is just going to be the first of many lawsuits against the states by aggrieved ISPs. And I found out, actually, I was in Connected, Oklahoma a couple weeks ago, and found out that Cox had actually threatened to sue the state of Oklahoma for the way it was planning on spending its ARPA money. It's a capital projects fund money. And then the state backed down and gave Cox more money. And the consequence of those kind of lawsuits is inevitably, if you don't think BEAD money is being spent fast enough now, it's going to delay it even further. So, like I said, I've been urging, and frankly, Rhode Island should be an easy one for the Secretary of Commerce. She was the governor of Rhode Island, to call up Cox and say, cut the nonsense. And that's not the word I used. So I would like to see them push back publicly and let ISPs know that they just can't get away with like suing every state that they're not happy with.
Right.
So we've only seen this with Cox. Do we think we're going to see it with other providers, or is Cox just the first one who's taken the leap into this foray of suing states?
Doug predicted it in Arizona, I believe.
I know 3 states where there's a good chance. So it doesn't mean it's going to happen. And if there's 3, there might be 7 or 8. So, and Gigi said it, if this starts, it could snowball. So, because there's ISPs unhappy with every state. So that's the problem. So.
Blair, did you want to say anything about this, or should we jump over to the election? All right. So Blair, you've done this is what we wanted to have you on to talk about. The impact on the election. Presumably one of the 2 people running for the Democratic or the Republican parties are going to be elected. You've done a 5-part series for New Street Research looking at this, and I'm sure you've written and talked about it elsewhere. There's a couple of comments. Why don't you hit a few of your top items, and then there's a couple of things I want to throw up for discussion around that.
So let me just start by saying that in terms of telecom policy in the election, the next 4 years, I think, will be very consequential, not because of the election per se, but because of certain things that are going to happen. BEAD money will finally start rolling out. Universal service is going to have to be reformed. It may have to be reformed because of the Supreme Court agreeing with the Fifth Circuit and invalidating the current structure. But even if the court doesn't do that, the fundamental economics are very problematic, so it will have to be reformed. And then we've had 4 years where we really haven't prepared any spectrum for allocation, and I think we're approaching, by the end of the decade, a spectrum crunch, and it usually takes 6 to 13 years to get spectrum ready for reallocation, and there's a lot of debates about that. So it's going to be an important time. I'll quickly say that if Harris is elected, you can see something similar to the Biden administration, certainly in terms of BEAD. USF is more problematic. It's going to require Congress. Who knows if the Senate goes Republican and the Democrats take the House. There are ways to get a compromise, but I think it's tricky. And there's a national spectrum strategy, which the Biden administration has started. The more kind of, from a Wall Street perspective, interesting question is what happens if Trump wins. The reason I say it's interesting is because of the influence of Elon Musk on policy, it is possible that you will have the most dominant player, which, 25 years ago would have been, 35 years ago would have been AT&T, but you'll now have it be a satellite company. And so you can see the argument about shifting BEAD dollars to satellite. You can see various ways in which, look, any dollar the federal government spends in rural America for anyone other than satellite is bad for satellite, just as a matter of economics. So you can see Musk trying to really change policy rather dramatically. And also he's very involved with spectrum policies. And in one of the notes I went through kind of a number of small ways that basically, look, his attitude, which is not different than anybody else's, is I should be able to use other people's spectrum because I don't really interfere with what they're doing. But if anybody gets close to using my spectrum, it's horrible interference. I'm not making a judgment about the accuracy of that. I'm just saying it would be a really dramatic change to have Starlink essentially driving federal government policy. And let me just say to close, kind of from a global perspective, this is the sixth election that I've covered for Wall Street. I think it's the first time where I said industry is better off under the Democrats. And the reason for that change is the things that Wall Street and industry fears from a Democratic regime, frankly, the courts are not going to allow to happen. Reasonable minds can differ, but the odds, I think, favor the courts overturning the net neutrality rules, overturning the digital discrimination rules, overturning other things that the FCC might do. Whereas the things that industry needs, such as a universal service program that distributes money to lots of different folks, it's just more likely to happen under the Democrats for a variety of different reasons. So it's a very curious year, and I think a very important one. The election will matter a lot, but the courts are going to matter a lot. And finally, I'll simply say the states are going to matter more than ever.
Well, and there's one other thing that I think is a big wild card, which I felt like you treated appropriately, which is this question of tariffs. A lot of small ISPs and big ISPs are bringing in stuff. If you see a significant increase in tariffs, I believe if you just want to spend a minute on that, it seems like a lot of people are just assuming that that's bluster and would not happen.
Yeah, it's really curious to me. I take a different view than I think most economists take. I agree with the economists that it's going to cause inflation, that whether it's 10 or 20% baseline, it's going to be very problematic. It's going to be particularly problematic for the telecom industry that is importing certain things from foreign governments, our foreign countries, though the Biden administration did create a lot of Buy America opportunities. A second thing is, in terms of the workforce, mass deportations, you're talking about a lot of the workforce, and Doug knows a lot more about this than me, that people rely on to build out fiber networks and things like that. But my view is a more political view, which is why does Trump care? It's because it gives him political power and leverage. What he has said is that he will impose a fundamental baseline on everyone, but then raise it or lower it depending on how he feels. Now, the question is, how will he make that decision? Will he read a 300-page economic analysis saying that if you raise this tariff or lower this one, here's the impact on jobs? I don't really think so. I think what you're going to see, as you have seen him flip-flop on TikTok, on crypto, on visas, on EVs, when wealthy people essentially support him either in the campaign or buy his social media stock, or I don't know, invest in Jared Kushner's fund. A lot of these things are non-transparent, but even if they're transparent under Supreme Court, most recent Supreme Court cases, it's not clear that it's illegal to offer a gratuity. It's not a bribe anymore. It's a gratuity.
Oh, yeah. Don't even get me started on this.
And so what you see is what the tariffs creates an opportunity for a market for Trump's affections, but that is a market behavior that is going to be very problematic for the economy overall.
Well, and for the world economy. Yeah.
Before I turn this over, I want to see how other people react. I do want to ask, at New Street Research, is there an over/under for how much Comcast will pay someone to take all of its broadcast holdings if Trump is elected? Like, will they just will they be writing a check to get that off their hands and away from their core business?
Well, here's the problem. I know you mean
let's just keep it brief.
Yeah, but there actually is a problem. I mean, which is, what business are they in?
Right.
If you want to say just get rid of the whole content business, then, you know, but who's going to be the logical buyer? I don't think he's going to let Disney buy it, and I'm not sure he would let Paramount buy it.
I think Jared
Warner
Kushner buys
can't
it
afford
for
So,
$2.
but yeah, but if all you're doing is selling NBC because you want to get rid of an MSNBC, then you have a problem. Who's going to make movies for Universal if they believe that Brian Roberts is always going to bend the knee to Comcast? I mean, to Trump. There's a lot of problems in the content business.
Yeah. All right. So, any other thoughts about the election? People want to make points, ask questions. Good, Dad.
I would like to expand a little bit on his one point, which is the states are going to get a stronger role because as the FCC bows out of stuff, the states do not have the same concern with the courts. They're going to step in and try all sorts of stuff, I believe. So it's going to be, and that'll make a real mishmash. I mean, I've been around. Actually, Blair, you're not the oldest one. We're the same age. I mean, one of the things I did in the early days was I negotiated cable agreements with cities over and over and over and over again. We're going to get back to this sort of balkanization of the network if all the states take different paths. It's going to get very interesting. So, yep.
Well, and let's not forget the role of the local communities as well.
Yeah.
You know, and I was on a call the other day with a bunch of folks who were working in digital inclusion and digital equity. And it just came up time and time again, particularly with the demise of the ACP, how important it is for communities to have the capital to build their own infrastructure. So, you know, there seems to be a little bit of lull in the excitement over municipal broadband, a little bit, because of all the BEAD money and people think it's going to solve everything. I think it's going to become readily apparent that it's not going to solve everything. It's certainly not going to solve the affordability problem for most folks. So let's not forget the local community. They have to serve their constituents. They have to make sure everybody is wired with robust and affordable broadband. So the states are one thing, and I agree. A lot of power is going to shift to the states. It already has. It really has ever since Trump got elected the first time. But the local communities, I think, also will start to take more matters into their own hands.
Kim?
I was just going to say there's an election going on. I didn't know.
I've already voted, so it's over for me. It's just now it's just
Okay.
100 political podcasts until it's over.
It's not over. Look at your text. Come on.
The thing that brings this all together, I think, is the look, college roommate for Chris actually here is a little bit late to the game. He wants to say, wait, there's an election this year also. So common joke. So one of the things I think brings together a bunch of the stuff we talked about is something that I saw as a meta theme running through what you wrote, Blair, and what I think is sort of out there, which is that regulation of some sort is coming. It might be effective, it might be ineffective. If Republicans are in charge, they will probably, at the federal level, they will probably not pursue national regulation. And at the same time, it seems like the court interpretation is that they have limited power to preempt states if they are not doing things. If the FCC is not doing things, it cannot preempt other governments. And so basically, we are going to see regulation of some sort or another, probably some good and some bad from a perspective of whether it works or not. That is not something I hear other places. But when you look at the results of the survey we started the show off with, people are demanding that, and we've gone through this before. It's not going to get better as prices keep going up and service keeps declining.
I think that's right. The legal point is simply, industry was very excited when the Supreme Court articulated the major question doctrine and got rid of the Chevron doctrine, saying, now if the FCC tries anything, we'll just go to the court and say the FCC can't do this, only Congress can do this. And in the first round, that they've won on the net neutrality decision on the major question grounds. The problem with that is that if you say Congress has to deal with this and they haven't dealt with it clearly, then you've opened it up for the states to deal with it. And there's the kind of the preemption doctrine of the courts is if Congress doesn't do something, then generally speaking, states are free to do what they want. And you already see this where California has a net neutrality rule, and that's not being challenged under the current proceeding.
Any other thoughts on regulation and the election?
I'm just excited for it to be over. Let's do it. Let's see. And I would agree with you, Chris. I have already voted as well, so it is over for me.
If Travis was here and I nudged him to say something, he would reflect back on how wonderful Edgit Pi was in freeing up the 6 gigahertz for unlicensed usage. And so I want to see, Blair, one of the other things you've noted is a general need for more spectrum, sense that some are overplaying the spectrum crunch that could come by the end of the decade, but that in general we need to see more. I feel like this FCC has not moved very rapidly. I don't really know what the opportunities are, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But for our wireless friends, I think maybe a word or two on anything on that in the near future.
Well, this is actually the FCC that lost auction authority, which is really remarkable because auctions are probably the most widely bipartisan and most important policy change in the last 50 years, adopted by nearly every country, the winner of 2 Nobel Prizes, as well as, and I was really proud of this one because I'm from Los Angeles. Somehow an auction won an Emmy. I don't understand how, but it did. Anyway, no, it's been remarkable. Here's the thing about our friends in the wireless community. They are always saying they need more spectrum. And then if you say, here's some more spectrum, they go, no, but not right now, because our we don't have the bank account necessary. So it's really hard to get the timing of it right, but eventually they are going to be right. And you could say it's 2028, you could say it's 2030. We are going to have new generations. This is a very problematic and difficult thing, but I'll simply note that there is no systemic way that this FCC or this Congress is actually approaching the issue to say, look, just, if you invest money in a business, you are free to sell that stock. It's much more difficult with spectrum. So that any investor who invested a bunch of money in 1970 in GE, in the year 2000 might have said, hey, I think I'll sell my GE stock and buy this thing called Google or this thing coming up called Facebook. And that would have been the right thing to do. We invested tons of spectrum in broadcasters a long time ago. Moving it away from them is a tricky thing, but it can be done. And we did it with the broadcast incentive auction. But this FCC and this Congress, and by the way, the Pi FCC did not do any real work other than in the case of the satellite C-band to prepare new spectrum so that the next FCC could actually auction. And I think, it's one of those things where because of the timing and because politics tends to be on 24-hour timeframes, difficult to do long-term planning, but it's also necessary.
So again, I just want to put a finer point on what Blair said. The FCC has not had the legal power to auction spectrum. Has it been, a year and a half? Or has it been 2 years now, Blair?
I think it's been more than that, almost 3 years.
It's insane. And we don't have time to kind of delve into the why. The Department of Defense is one of the whys. Lack of adequate leadership in Congress is another part of the whys. But the extent that, again, as Blair said, it's one of the most bipartisan things that the FCC does, and they do not have the power to do a darn thing when it comes to auctioning spectrum right now because Congress just won't give them the power.
When I would say, and I'm not going to rant because I don't want to, when Travis isn't here, I don't feel quite right. So one of the things that I observed from the Federal Communications Commission is I often find myself in more agreement with Democrats than Republicans. At the same time, I don't think when Democrats cannot get things done, saying that Republicans oppose them is a good answer. The Democrats should have an actual strategy to actually get things done rather than just saying Republicans won't let us do the things we want to do. Well, duh, it's a party system. That's how it works. We need a better system.
I agree with you on that one. Blair and I have maybe a minor disagreement, but I think that there's bipartisan blame to go around for the reason why we don't get it, why we haven't gotten an ACP extension. Right. I believe that Senator Schumer could have brought the ACP Extension Act to the floor and it would have passed with over 60 votes. There were 8 Republican co-sponsors and several more that had told, the folks working in the field that they didn't want to co-sponsor, but they would vote for it. And he never felt the pressure to bring it to the floor. So I think there's blame to go around on both sides. And it's not a Republican or a Democratic thing because it obviously helped all states. It just was a failure of leadership in both houses. I'm not going to let the Republicans off the hook, but I do believe that if Senator Schumer had brought that bill to the floor and it had passed, it would have put an enormous amount of pressure on Speaker Johnson to do the same in the House.
Anyone else have a comment? As long as you're not defending Senator Schumer, I don't want to hear that. With a couple of minutes left, I want to touch on one last thing, which is Verizon buying Frontier. Craig Moffitt says idiocy. Blair Levin, your colleagues at least say genius.
Yes.
I'm puzzled. I remember when I think Frontier buying all those properties from Verizon back then was possibly one of the dumbest decisions we'd seen, at least from my perspective. Wonderful for Verizon's tax status, but just a quick note on that. And we did talk about this briefly before with some of us. But where are you coming down right now?
Well, first of all, let me just say, look, my politics are not really a secret. I worked in both the Clinton and the Obama administration. I'm something of a liberal, but I have to say I really enjoy Wall Street arguments much more because they're really smart, they're really data-based, they're not a bunch of sound bites, there's deep analysis, and at the end of the day, I don't emotionally care. I think my colleague John Chaplin is right, but Craig Moffitt's a very smart guy. And, eventually some investors will get rich and some investors will get poor. But I'm going to articulate what I think John Chaplin would say about why it's a brilliant move for Verizon. Number one, at the price they're getting just for the fiber builds, they're getting Frontier at a very good price. That if you compare it to other transactions, including the T-Mobile has done, to buy fiber providers, the per household cost is much lower. The second thing is there's always synergies. Verizon already is a fiber provider. You buy another one, you have certain synergies. But the big strategic difference is the convergence question. And the question is, if a company that has fiber assets and wireless assets buys more fiber, do they tend to reduce churn in the wireless segment and have a bigger bundle and keeping the customers and getting all those advantages? Jonathan reads the data as saying yes. Craig reads the data as saying no. I think we're really early in that game, and so the data is not conclusive. But that may be the biggest. There's a variety of different debates on Wall Street that are very different, by the way, than the debates in DC. But the big debate on Wall Street is, are companies better off with a convergence strategy of combining fiber and wireless with the deal that everybody talks about, T-Mobile Charter being another example of that. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying that's a debate on Wall Street. And as opposed to simply saying the wireless ultimately will be more productive, and so double down on wireless and try to get broadband everywhere through wireless, and that'll work. There's so many different variables that will affect your answer, but that's what the debate is about.
Doug or Kim, or
I still stand by that it was Verizon made a smart move by buying it back. I think it is a very smart move for them to buy it back. Was it a dumb move for them to buy to do it all in the first place? Probably. Or no, I think it was actually a brilliant move because Frontier paid maximum profit or maximum cost, and now they're buying it back on pennies on the dollar. From a sole business aspect, I think it was a brilliant move. From an all other technical and like digital equity and all of that, maybe not that much, but that's my total.
Yeah, it has real impacts on real people. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah. I have to say that the second I heard it, I had real amusement because I was actually a consultant when at that time Citizens made the first bid for the first Verizon property. And it's, I've now been in industry on several of those. I mean, I've now seen that roll back to Verizon. I saw all the our box roll back to Southwestern Bell. It's very interesting to see the full circle, but they sold copper and they're getting back fiber. It was a brilliant move because they were not going to invest in all that copper in those markets. So the long run, I think they're better off. And I happen to side with the wireless convergence is probably the best benefit for this. I think that's what we're going to find in the long run. It'll take 5 years to prove it, so we're not going to find out that we see. But that seems to be the right answer. So, yep.
Gigi?
So two thoughts. Number one is I guess I'm not sad to see a company that has defaulted multiple times on its obligations to the U.S. taxpayers leave the market. And second, I hope the digital equity advocates exact a nice digital equity pound of flesh from Verizon for this deal. Verizon, I love them. It's probably the ISP that I work best with. But they really haven't been leaders in the digital inclusion, digital equity space. I will give that crown to Comcast.
Yes.
So I think this is an opportunity here because I think regulators will allow this to happen, is to get commitments, long-term commitments towards not only robust low price offerings, but also digital literacy and other digital inclusion work that needs to be done.
Yeah, can I just add, Chris? Gigi is raising a point that we didn't really cover in terms of the impact of the election. If Harris wins, I think there is certainly an opportunity to get those kinds of commitments long term, and I think Verizon will honor them. If Trump is elected, I don't see a Trump FCC requiring that kind of thing. Wall Street tends to look at this, that Trump will be much easier on deals. I don't actually think that's the case. I think he's very transactional. He'll care about some deals. Chris, you mentioned Comcast. I think the media deals are going to be very problematic, actually. But in all of these things, like there's an upcoming DBS deal, what does Elon Musk think about that? That's kind of a weird wild card on a transaction. But the big point is you can have kind of the traditional policy elements in the transaction analysis under Harris. In Trump, who knows?
The thing that that boggles my mind about it is that it strikes me that there are some people that have run these companies like Frontier that have just run them in extremely bad ways. I don't understand all the numbers. I assume that there were people that made out well with Frontier's bankruptcy and Frontier being found guilty in multiple different, I don't know if it's found guilty or found responsible for numerous problems in state after state. But I was always wondered, like those, I assume those people go on to have other multi-million-dollar CEO and top executive positions, and no one seems to learn that they're terrible at doing their job, unless we define their job differently, which is entirely possible. Which is what I hope that people who tune into this show without a deep understanding of how the money game is played have a sense of a lot of the things that we care about getting out of these companies are not the metrics that they are actually trying to maximize their performance on. So this is one of the things I love about the local networks, the cooperative networks. They're generally just trying to do something that's pretty obvious, deliver a good service at a reasonable price and make sure they can pay their bills over the next several years. And that's the way I like my utility to operate. So no amount of federal regulation is going to get Verizon to play that game, I don't think. So just something to think about as people are have opportunities in places to steer these local conversations. Any last comments before we wrap it?
Yes, I would like to see Gigi's hat again. Thank you.
It's a great
hat.
Statistically, I think someone in the audience is celebrating a birthday, so we'll also have it in honor of that person.
Absolutely.
Of that one person, we don't know who they are, but happy birthday to
Should
you.
we sing?
I will cut my microphone if you all sing.
This is the 100th episode. We would like 101st, and if we sing, it's it. It's done.
That's it. It's over.
Actually, Chris, can I just say congratulations to you for the 100th episode. I hope you invite us back for your 200th. The state of broadband will be probably very different by then, but it'll be fun to talk about, no doubt.
100% connectivity by then, Blair, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yes. I might just declare that next week is the 200th episode. I have a lot of control here. So. All right. Well, thank you, Kim and Doug, Rye, especially for sticking with us through these 4 years and making it happen. Blair and Gigi, thanks for coming on whenever you're able. We greatly appreciate it. Travis, if you're still out there listening, we miss you and look forward to the next show. Thank you so much for 100 great episodes. And to our audience, we could not do this without you. And even if we could, we probably wouldn't. We wouldn't want to do it without you. So thank you for tuning in, asking great things in the chat, telling me later that you listen to the audio. Love knowing that it's out there making a difference for folks. So thank you all. It's been a wonderful 4 years and 100 episodes. We look forward to the next.